So when we're going and examining names in the Bible, for instance, when we're looking at Cain, Cain means a farmer, a smith, a person who is a user of iron and things of that nature. Well, we look at these terms and we find that the same thing exists among the Yoruba, except the Q sound in the Hebrew and the Arabic corresponds with the G sound in Yoruba. And so what we do, what you're seeing on page 16, is what we call a set of correspondence, regular correspondences. So we can demonstrate that wherever word that exists over here in Arabic and Hebrew, we find it over here in the Yoruba. And the sound mutations are regular. So these are the same words, they're just dialectical variations of each other. So, I put that there so we have a better understanding of that concept of linguistics, but not only that, to help folks understand that names in myths have meaning. And if you understand the meaning behind the names in the myth, you can get what's being told in the story. So, if you understand that Cain in the Bible represents farming, iron tools, and the civilization building, then you'll understand what is being told in the story, because Abel means a farmer. I mean, not a farmer, a nomad, a pastoralist. So when you're seeing in the story Cain versus Abel, you're really reading a story about pastoralism versus nomadism or shepherds or cattle herding and things of this nature. Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of other clues that you can ascertain just by knowing the names of the main characters in the myth. So this is saying all of that in a nutshell. This is one of the reasons why I went through that method in that section of the discussion in Passion of the Christ or Passion of Osiris. All righty. That's a very good question, and it is my contention that it does not come from the Osiris and Set legends. It is more so their response to the Osiris and Set legends. And people got to understand this, that there's the Cain and Abel story, but people don't know the other side of the story, which was first told by the Egyptians concerning Osiris, who also represents the farming aspect and the tool makers and things of this nature, and Set, who was the pastoralist. And I go into detail in an upcoming work that I'm working on called, I hint on it in the Passion of the Christ or Passion of Osiris, but I go into more detail in this upcoming work, Ogun, African Fire Philosophy and the Meaning of Kemet. Because what we have to understand is that this beef, this internal beef, has been going on in Africa since the dawn of farming. And what was happening at this particular time, and this is going back into the Saharan days, the pre-Saharan days, and this is where these old myths developed. And so, excuse me, what you have here is a story basically arguing for and against the confiscation of land. Because what everybody has to remember, we kind of have to go back even further to just human evolution in general. Remember, prior to farming, there was no real settled spaces on Earth. And this is why Africans have moved all across the Earth, because we were all nomads. And then when people started settling down farming, this is why Osiris in the myth is considered a savior, because Osiris, introducing farming to the people, saved them from constantly having to move around. He allowed them to be stable and settled in the area. Sure, they had to work for a period, but this freed up a lot of their time outside of the planting season to explore other aspects of living and interest. And this is the development of philosophy, astronomy, other types of mathematics and things of this nature as a result of the introduction of farming and people having more time to dedicate to the development of themselves versus always constantly having to look for food. and develop, shelters and move in relationship to where the herds move. So there's a good video out there by a doctor by the name of Spencer Wells. He's a geneticist, and he wrote a book called Journey of Man, and he also has a film. You can probably see the whole film on Google Video by the same title, Journey of Man, and he talks about how like certain Africans going into Asia was following the reindeer, and their whole life is just dedicated to the reindeer because the reindeer is their source of food, clothing, shelter, the whole nine. And so it gives you some kind of glimpse into the past of what was going on. Getting back to the story here, now you have individuals who are pastoralists. At this time, they've domesticated various cattle who enjoy this life. They're traditionalists. And what's happening is that these farmers are taking up more and more of the plush land. And so for people who depend on cattle, they need lots of land and vegetation to feed their cattle, which is their livelihood. So there's a clash here because everywhere that these roaming nomads, these roaming pastoralists would go, they would come into conflict with the farmers because their cattle was eating up their eating up their crops. So this beef over land rights and who has right to land has gone into the realm of myth, and they each tell their story based upon this. And I go into in the Ogun book, I go into the linguistics to demonstrate, as we just talked about, how Ogun is Cain and how Abel is the pastoralist in this thing, but how Abel relates to the word Fulani, and how the Fulani in Nigeria and the Oke Ogun are the farmers in Nigeria, how they to this date are clashing. I mean, killing each other. I have articles, and I cite passages from these articles which discuss these farmers, the Oke Ogun in Nigeria, and the Fulani, the Abel. And we're going to, the linguistics later that shows that Abel and the Fulani are the same word, and they have the same lifestyle. Your Fulani people, your Afar people, your Avriga people, these are your original quote-unquote Hebrews. And I know we had a discussion on that prior. But anyway, they're still clashing over the same issues to this day and killing each other over it. So, of course, these go into the realm of myth. So when you're viewing the story, whether in Egypt's telling the story from the standpoint of the farmers, or you go into the Hebrew story and they're telling the story from the vantage point of the pastoralists, they're saying that each one of these, they understand and recognize themselves as brothers. We come from the same family, but they're killing our lifestyle. So in Egypt, it's Set that kills Osiris, kills the farming industry, scatters it. In the Hebrew tradition, it is Cain, the farmer, the tool maker, who is killing the industry of the cattle herders. And so, we get into even modern day environmental issues, based upon this ancient beef between pastoralists and urbanizers. So it's these kind of things that we have to understand and not look at these myths as something literal, but that they're telling us a story in a very unique and creative way. And the key to deciphering what these stories mean is simply learning what the names mean. Right? I wanted to cut off people on the past in terms of, when you're arguing for borrowings in linguistics or just in anthropology in general, in order to argue that there was some borrowing going on, you have to establish, first of all, that there was contact between two groups or two people or whatnot. So what I mean by cutting them off at the pass is, for anyone trying to argue that the Hebrews, couldn't have gotten the story of Asar from the Egyptians, or Jesus in this instance from the Egyptians, it's kind of hard to make that claim when you have temples in Israel that are dedicated to Osiris, in Canaan and places where these individuals dwell. So, you know, you have that, and then you have their own testimony that they lived in Egypt for 400 years. Whether this is true or not is beyond the point. What they said is they came into Egypt as 70 people, 70 or 72 people, and they came out as 600,000 individuals out of doing an exodus out of Egypt. There's no way that you can live in a country for 400 years and not be assimilated into the thought and the culture and not be aware of certain histories of the people there. If according to their story was correct, let's just assume that the Old Testament story is correct about their history. There's no such thing as a Hebrew people or a Hebrew language until they get to Canaan, which is after the Egyptian Exodus. What the story is telling us is that it's a group of Chaldeans who came into Egypt, and then they left as a mixed multitude. The whole Semitic thing is really kind of confusing because it's really not a blood thing. There's really no such thing as a Semite in terms of blood relationships. But it's these Chaldeans who came in with some other Ethiopians and Egyptians who all left and, you know, went into the land of Canaan. Before then, there was no such thing as a Hebrew language because the Hebrew language itself is a dialect of the Canaanite language, which means that they weren't speaking Hebrew when they left or came into Egypt. You know, so you have to wonder, okay, what language or languages were these people speaking? And so remember what we talked about earlier, as far as that nobody creates a language. You know, the languages in this day and age, or that even at that stage, because remember, humanity been existing hundreds of thousands of millions of years, you know. So at this stage in the game, you're not making up a language for a group of people. You know, they replaced their language with the Canaanite language. And over time, it became its own dialect, and that's what you know is Hebrew. No. I'm saying that the
script, excuse me.
We have to distinguish the scripts. Yeah, the writing script. The writing script was influenced from the ancient Egyptian hieratic demotic scripts, as far as Hebrew and the Arabic script is concerned. The ancient Egyptian and the Semitic languages share an ultimate parent, but they are not in the same language group. The New Testament was written in Alexandria. We got to remember that. It was written in Greek and written in Alexandria. So you're not going to find a Hebrew version of the New Testament, you know, or at least an original one. They probably retranslated it into Hebrew. But you can't find an original Hebrew document for the New Testament. It was written in Greek in Alexandria, Egypt. And the ancient Egyptian, as it stands now in terms of mainstream linguistics, is a language isolate that it cannot be related to the Semitic language. It shares some features, but it is not by any stretch of the imagination a Semitic language. So these Semitic languages could not have come out of the ancient Egyptian language. You know, they share a parent, but they couldn't have come out of the ancient Egyptian language. Now, it is my argument in terms of the Judaic tradition that these were disgruntled ancient Egyptian priests who had a different ideology, a different way of understanding something. They just didn't agree with the general consensus in Egypt and decided to create their own thing. That's why there's so many similarities between the two systems. And the more you understand about the language being used, you know that this comes from the same tradition.